The contract on the table wasn't made of paper, it was made of silence. A specific, heavy kind of silence that only costs $10,000 a plate. I watched the man across from me, a man the world called a visionary, a man my husband called a savior, slide a fountain pen across the mahogany. The nib was gold, the ink was black. The intent was murder, legally speaking. I didn't reach for it. I reached for my wine, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't check with Grant before I took a sip. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. My mascara wand hovered 2 millimeters from my left eye, vibrating in sympathy with the suspension of the leased Audi A6. Grant was taking the corners of the mountain road too fast, banking on the car's German engineering to compensate for his American desperation. "You're doing it again," he said. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the winding asphalt of the Pacific Coast Highway, illuminated only by our high beams and the occasional flash of a reflector post. The breathing thing. You do that huff when you're anxious. Stop it. It makes you sound asthmatic. "I'm trying not to blind myself," I said, capping the mascara. I looked at my reflection in the visor mirror. The woman staring back was polished, terrified, and wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. It was emerald green, silk, and tight enough to restrict blood flow to my extremities. Grant had picked it out. He said it made me look statuesque, which I suspected was code for decorative and silent. "We are 10 minutes out," Grant said. His knuckles were bleached bone white on the leather steering wheel. He adjusted his grip, one finger at a time, peeling the skin back and replanting it. "Let's review the game plan. What are you?" I sighed, smoothing the silk over my thighs. "I am Tessa. I am a supportive spouse. I enjoy gardening, Pilates, and listening to men talk about commercial zoning laws. And I do not discuss structural engineering. I do not correct anyone's math. I do not mention that I have a master's degree from MIT, and I certainly do not mention Vertex Solutions." "Good," Grant exhaled, a sharp hiss of air. "Tessa, listen to me. This isn't just a dinner. Mr. Vance he's eccentric. He likes traditional dynamics. If he thinks I can't control my own household, he won't trust me with the Blackwood development. And we need this. You know we need this." I knew. I knew because I handled the bills he thought he was hiding. I knew about the 3 maxed-out Credit One cards stuffed in his sock drawer. I knew about the past due notices from the fertility clinic that arrived in nondescript white envelopes, which I steamed open and resealed before he got home. I knew we were drowning, and Grant was convinced that if he just swam harder, the water would turn into wine. "I won't embarrass you, Grant," I said softly. I reached out, placing my hand on his forearm. His muscles were rock hard, tense with adrenaline. "I want this for you." He flinched, shaking my hand off. "Don't wrinkle the jacket, Tess. It's a rental." He reached toward the glove compartment. "Hand me the breath mints in the back." I popped the latch. The little light inside flickered on, illuminating the cluttered cave of Grant's organizational failures. Old receipts, a tire pressure gauge, a crushed box of Altoids, and a long, legal-sized envelope with a red stamp on the corner. My brain processed the text before my hand could grab the mints. Notice of default. Action required. It wasn't a utility bill. It was the mortgage. "Tessa," Grant snapped. "Mints, today." I grabbed the tin, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I shoved the envelope deeper under the manual, burying the red stamp. "He doesn't know I saw it," I told myself. "He's protecting me." He didn't want me to worry. "Here," I said, placing the tin in his cup holder. My voice sounded thin, reedy. He popped 2 mints into his mouth and crunched them aggressively. "Look, I'm sorry I snapped. Everything rides on tonight. Vance is looking for a partner, not just a contractor. If I land the Blackwood estate, we're set. No more debt. No more stress. We can pay the clinic up front for the next cycle. We can have the baby." He turned to me then, flashing that boyish, charming smile that had convinced me to marry him 5 years ago. The smile that made me believe he was a dreamer, not a gambler. Do it for the family, Tess? I forced my lips into a curve that I hoped looked like devotion. For the family. The gate to the Blackwood estate was less a barrier and more a declaration of sovereignty. It was wrought iron 12 feet high, topped with spikes that looked sharp enough to puncture a lung. Grant rolled down the window as we pulled up to the security kiosk. The air that rushed in smelled of ocean salt and expensive landscaping, night-blooming jasmine and money. A guard stepped out. He wasn't the usual rent-a-cop type. He wore a tactical vest over a dark suit, and the earpiece coiled behind his ear was professional grade. He didn't smile. Name? Grant Miller, my husband said, projecting his voice. The salesman voice, deep, resonant, entirely fake. I'm here to see Mr. Vance. 7:30 reservation. The guard didn't check a clipboard. He checked a tablet that was mounted to the kiosk wall. He tapped the screen, his eyes scanning a list that I couldn't see. IDs, the guard said. Grant fumbled for his wallet, producing his driver's license. I opened my clutch. My fingers were shaking slightly as I pulled out my ID. Why are you shaking? It's a dinner party, not a deposition. The guard took Grant's license, glanced at it for half a second, and handed it back. Then he took mine. He held it under the kiosk light. He looked at the photo. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the photo again. He tapped something on his earpiece. Checkpoint Alpha. Guest arrival. Confirming visual on subject V2. He listened to a response I couldn't hear. His eyes never left my face. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine, a primal warning system that had been dormant since I left the industry. Subject V2? Is there a problem? Grant asked, his voice pitching up an octave. We're on time. Mr. Vance is expecting us. The guard ignored him. He handed my ID back to me, his fingers brushing mine. They were cold. Proceed, Mrs. Miller. Drive slowly. The sensors are sensitive. The gate groaned open, the heavy iron swinging inward. Grant gunned the engine, tires spinning slightly on the gravel before finding traction. Jesus, Grant muttered, checking his hair in the rearview mirror. Little tin pot dictators. Give a guy a badge and a flashlight and he thinks he's the FBI. Did you see how he looked at you? He checked my ID twice, I said, rubbing the plastic card with my thumb. Grant, did he say subject V2? You're hearing things, Grant scoffed. He probably said vehicle 2. We're the second car. Stop overanalyzing everything. You always do this. You find a conspiracy in a coffee order. He was right. I did do that. It was why I was a good structural engineer. I saw the cracks before the collapse. But Grant needed me to be wrong. He needed me to be the fragile, imaginative wife who needed his protection. You're right, I lied. I'm just nervous. Don't be, he said, smoothing his tie as the house came into view. Just be pretty. I'll do the talking. The Blackwood estate was a modernist fortress of glass and steel perched on the edge of a cliff, defying gravity with an arrogance that made my palms itch. As an engineer, I respected the cantilevered terrace. As a human being, I found it terrifying. We were ushered into the main atrium by a silent house manager who moved like he was on casters. The ceiling soared 30 feet above us, supported by exposed steel trusses that had been painted a matte, industrial black. Champagne? A server appeared at my elbow. I hadn't heard him approach. She's fine, Grant answered for me. She'll have sparkling water with lime. I didn't argue. Alcohol made me flushed, and Grant hated it when I got flushed. He grabbed a tumbler of scotch for himself and immediately scanned the room, his eyes darting around like a predator, seeking a weak antelope. There's Collins from the zoning board, he whispered, leaning close to my ear. And that's... holy shit! That's Elena Rostova, the interior designer. If she's here, Vance is serious about the remodel. Grant, I whispered back, Look at the trusses. What? Why? The load distribution. It's asymmetrical. See the cross bracing on the north wall? It's thicker than the south. That shouldn't be necessary unless... Tessa, he hissed, squeezing my arm. Stop. Nobody cares about the cross bracing. Do not bore people with tech talk. Go stand over there by the sculpture and look mysterious. I need to say hello to Collins. He detached himself from me and strode across the polished concrete floor, his salesman voice booming as he greeted the zoning official. I was left standing alone next to a twisted metal sculpture that looked like a car crash frozen in time. I took a sip of my water. It was warm. I watched the room. There were about 12 people. High-end suits, aggressive jewelry, the kind of posture that comes from years of Pilates and power. They were clustered in groups, murmuring. I felt eyes on me. I turned. Across the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the dark ocean, a man was watching me. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He raised his glass slightly. I looked away, pretending to study the sculpture. A server passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He stopped in front of me. "Crab cake, madam?" "No, thank you." "Please," he said. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Take a napkin." He tilted the tray. Under the edge of the linen, a white cocktail napkin was protruding slightly. It wasn't blank. There was a sketch on it. I hesitated, then reached out and took the napkin, palming it. The server bowed and vanished into the crowd. I unfolded it against my clutch, shielding it from view. It was a drawing. A chaotic, hurried sketch of a structural node, a specific type of joint where 3 steel beams meet. Next to the drawing were numbers, coordinates, and a single word written in block letters, unstable. My breath hitched. I knew this joint. I had designed a variation of it 4 years ago for a bridge project in Seoul. It was my signature design, the vein node. It was proprietary. It was unpublished, and someone here knew it. I found Grant near the bar, laughing too loudly at a joke I was sure he didn't understand. He had his hand on the shoulder of a man in a gray suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Grant," I said, coming up behind him. He turned, annoyance flashing in his eyes before he masked it with a smile. "Gentlemen, this is my better half. Tessa, this is Mr. Sterling, City Planning." "Pleasure," I said, barely glancing at Sterling. "Grant, I need to speak to you for a second." "Can it wait, honey? We were just discussing the permit delays on the west side." "No," I said. "It can't." I saw his jaw tighten. He excused himself, apologizing for the domestic interruption, and steered me into a quiet alcove near the kitchen service doors. "What is it?" he hissed, his face inches from mine. I was making headway with Sterling. "Do you know how hard it is to get FaceTime with him?" "Look at this," I said, holding up the napkin. He glanced at it. "A doodle? You pulled me away for a doodle?" "It's not a doodle, Grant. It's a structural node. It's my design. From the Soul Project, the one I did under the Vertex pseudonym. A waiter gave it to me." Grant rolled his eyes so hard I thought they might detach. "Tessa, please. You're doing the paranoia thing again. It's a napkin. Maybe someone was explaining a renovation. Maybe you're projecting." "It says unstable, Grant, and it's my handwriting style. I didn't write this, but someone mimicked my drafting script." He grabbed the napkin from my hand and crumpled it into a ball. "Hey, stop it," he ordered. He shoved the crumpled paper into his pocket. "You are sabotaging me. You're bored or you're jealous that I'm the one working the room, so you're inventing a mystery to make yourself the center of attention. It's pathological, Tessa." "I am not." "You are. Just like the fertility treatments. Oh, the doctor hates me, the nurse gave me a look. It's always about you being a victim. Well, not tonight. Tonight is about us getting paid. So pull yourself together. Fix your lipstick and smile." He grabbed my elbow. "Mr. Vance is entering. Come on." I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, hot, stupid tears of frustration. He didn't believe me. He never believed me. But as he dragged me back into the main room, a cold knot formed in my stomach. He was gaslighting me, yes. But why was he so desperate to ignore the warning? The room went silent as the double doors at the far end of the atrium opened. Mr. Vance did not walk. He arrived. He was a small man, surprisingly, with a compact, coiled energy. He wore a velvet smoking jacket that should have looked ridiculous, but instead looked terrifyingly regal. He was flanked by two assistants who carried tablets like holy scriptures. Grant straightened his tie, puffing out his chest. "Here we go," he whispered. "Showtime." Vance moved through the room, shaking hands briefly, dismissing people with a nod. He was cutting a path straight toward us. Grant stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Vance, Grant Miller, such an honor to finally—" Vance walked right past Grant. He didn't even blink. He stopped directly in front of me. He looked me up and down, not with lust, but with the clinical appraisal of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. "Mrs. Miller," Vance said. His voice was like grinding stones. "Or do you prefer Ms. Vane?" My heart stopped. The air left my lungs. I stammered. Grant jumped in, oblivious to the name Vance had just used. He stepped between us, blocking Vance's view of me. "She goes by Mrs. Miller, sir. Old-fashioned that way. My wife is a very private person." But about the proposal I sent over regarding the foundation retrofitting. Vance looked at Grant for the first time. The look was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Miller," Vance said softly, "I am speaking to the talent. You are the logistics. Kindly step aside." Grant froze. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. Excuse me? Your wife," Vance said, stepping around Grant to look at me again. "I've read her papers on tensile stress in coastal environments. Fascinating reading, especially the addendum on seismic shifts." I found my voice. It was shaky, but it was there. That paper was published anonymously in the Journal of Civil Engineering, under a pseudonym. Vance smiled. It was a shark smile, rows of teeth. "Nothing is anonymous, my dear. Not if you know where to look. Dinner is served. I've seated you at my right hand. We have much to discuss." He turned and walked toward the dining room. Grant stood there, his face a mask of shock and fury. He turned to me, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. "What paper? What is he talking about?" "I don't know," I lied, but I did know. I knew exactly what was happening. My past had just walked into the room, and it was holding a knife. The dining room was a cavern. The table was a single slab of reclaimed walnut, long enough to land a plane on. I was seated at the head to the right of Mr. Vance. Grant was seated 4 chairs down, exiled to the Siberia of the table, sandwiched between a tax attorney and the silent interior designer. The first course was a scalloped ceviche that tasted like seawater and metal. "So," Vance said, addressing the table but looking at me, "we are gathered to discuss the future of the Blackwood estate. As you know, the cliffs are eroding. The foundation is compromised." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Mr. Miller believes he has the solution," Vance continued. "Grant, why don't you regale us with your strategy?" Grant perked up, sensing a lifeline. He wiped his mouth with his napkin and sat up straighter. This was his moment. He launched into his pitch. "Absolutely, Mr. Vance. The key is concrete injection. We drill micropiles into the bedrock, inject a high-viscosity polymer blend, and stabilize the soil. It's fast, it's cost-effective, and it's proven." He looked around the table, beaming. Vance didn't smile. He looked at me. "And what does Mrs. Miller think of concrete injection in a salt spray environment?" I looked at Grant. He was staring at me, his eyes pleading. "Back me up. Just agree." I gripped my fork. It's It's a standard industry solution, I said carefully. Standard, Vance repeated, tasting the word like sour wine. Yes, standard. Grant laughed, a nervous barking sound. Well, you don't reinvent the wheel, right? Tessa here, bless her heart, she worries about everything. If it were up to her, we'd rebuild the whole cliff with vibranium. She's got a great imagination, but not much practical experience with budgets. He was doing it. He was undercutting me to save face. He was turning me into the dizzy wife to explain away Vance's interest. In fact, Grant continued, gaining momentum, last month she tried to tell me that our garage door opener was interfering with the Wi-Fi because of electromagnetic shielding. Turns out the router was just unplugged. A few polite chuckles rippled around the table. And don't get me started on the car, Grant said, grinning. She thinks the lane assist feature is a government tracking device. I have to drive everywhere because she's afraid the steering wheel is going to lock up. He was lying. I never said any of that. He was stripping me naked in front of these strangers, painting me as a hysteric to elevate himself as the rational protector. I looked down at my plate. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. He's scared, I told myself. He's terrified of losing this deal. He doesn't mean it. She sounds delightful, Vance said, his voice flat. But I didn't ask about her driving, Mr. Miller. I asked about the concrete. Vance turned to me. He leaned in close. Tell me, Tessa, if you were to inject polymer into a porous limestone shelf that is already saturated with saline water, what happens to the chemical bond after 5 years? The table went silent. Grant opened his mouth to answer, but Vance held up a hand. Not you, Vance said. Her. I looked at Grant. He was glaring at me, a warning in his eyes. Don't you dare. But the engineer in me was screaming. The physics were wrong. Grant's plan was dangerous. It crystallizes, I whispered. Speak up, Vance commanded. It crystallizes, I said louder. The saline reacts with the polymer hardener. It creates expansive crystals. Within 5 years, the concrete won't just fail to bond, it will expand. It will crack the limestone from the inside out. The cliff won't stabilize. It will shatter. Grant slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. Tessa, that is ridiculous. Where did you even read that? Some blog? I wrote the code for the simulation, I said, my voice trembling but clear. In 2018, for the Army Corps of Engineers. Grant stared at me. The guests stared at me. Vance leaned back in his chair, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He picked up his wine glass. Finally, Vance said, someone at this table who isn't an idiot. The silence following my technical correction wasn't the polite silence of a dinner party pause. It was the vacuum of space. Grant was staring at me with a look that promised a long, screaming drive home. Vance was staring at me like I was a rare coin he had just found in the sofa cushions. Excuse me, I said, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped against the stone floor, a harsh, jagged sound. I need to powder my nose. Of course, Vance said, not looking away. Down the hall, second door on the left, the one with the brass handle. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking a metronome beat on the limestone. My back burned. I could feel Grant's eyes drilling into my spine. I reached the hallway. It was dimly lit, lined with black and white architectural photos of bridges, suspension, cantilever, truss. I walked past the guest bathroom. I needed distance. I needed to think. At the end of the hall, a heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Voices drifted out, low, urgent, male. I stopped. I knew the smart OPSEC rule. If you can hear them, they think they are alone. I pressed myself against the wall, breathing through my mouth to stay silent. Doesn't matter if the husband is an idiot, a voice hissed. It sounded like the lawyer, the man in the gray suit. We need the liability waiver signed before midnight. The underwriters are pulling the coverage at 12:01 a.m. He'll sign, Vance's voice replied. It was calm, amused. He's desperate. I smelled the foreclosure on him the moment he walked in. And the woman? The woman is the asset, Vance said. Forget the land. The land is worthless. The cliff is going to slide into the ocean in 10 years anyway. I need the patent. I need Vertex. My blood ran cold. Vertex. If she realizes what this dinner is, the lawyer started. She won't, Vance cut him off. She's a housewife, a terrified little bird. We get Grant to sign the waiver, which transfers all intellectual property rights created during the marriage to the community estate, and then we buy the estate for pennies on the dollar. He sells us her brain to pay off his gambling debts. Simple. Is it legal? It's barely legal, Vance chuckled, which is my favorite kind of legal. Now go back in there. Pour him more scotch. Make him feel like a king. I want that signature by dessert. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He sells us her brain. It wasn't just a job interview. It was a harvest. I stumbled into the guest bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely slide the bolt. I leaned against the marble sink, staring at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and dark. Asset, liability, community estate. I fumbled for my clutch. I needed to call someone. My lawyer. No, I didn't have a lawyer. I had Grant's lawyer. I didn't know who I needed. I pulled out my phone. No service. I stared at the screen. 0 bars. Come on, I whispered, tapping the screen. Come on. I moved to the window. It was small, high up, frosted glass. I stood on the toilet lid, holding the phone up to the glass. Searching. No service. I jumped down, panic rising in my throat like bile. A jammer, or just the thick stone walls of a fortress built to withstand a siege. I looked around the room. There, on the wall next to the towel rack, an old-fashioned rotary phone, purely decorative, made of bakelite and brass. I picked up the receiver. A dial tone. Thank God. I dialed 911. Click. Front gate security, a voice answered. It wasn't a dispatcher, it was the guard from the kiosk. Can I help you, guest? I slammed the receiver down. It was an internal line. Of course it was. This wasn't a house. It was a prison with a wine cellar. I was trapped. I was 10 miles from the nearest public road inside a compound owned by a man who wanted to steal my life's work, with a husband who was about to sell me to him. I needed leverage. I needed to know exactly what Grant was signing. I unlocked the bathroom door and peered into the hallway. Empty. I remembered where we had left our coats. The cloakroom was off the main atrium near the front door. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The atrium was empty, the sculpture casting long, twisted shadows across the floor. I slipped into the cloakroom. It smelled of cedar and expensive wool. Grant's briefcase was sitting on a bench next to my coat. It was a battered leather satchel he'd bought to look distinguished. I tried the latch. Locked. I looked at the combination wheels. 3 digits. I tried his birthday. 081. Click. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. 060. Click. Nothing. I closed my eyes, trying to think like Grant. Lazy. Arrogant. He wouldn't pick a random number. He would pick something he couldn't forget. Something he looked at every day. His car. The license plate ending. 999. Click. The latch popped open. I opened the lid. Inside, it was a mess of papers. I rifled through them, my fingers trembling. Utility bills, unpaid. Credit card statements, over limit. A betting slip from a track in Vegas, dated last Tuesday. And then, a blue folder. I opened it. The first page was a letter from the fertility clinic. Final notice. Account terminated. Dear Mr. Miller, due to non-payment of $14,000, we have destroyed the frozen embryos as per contract section 4.A. I stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. Destroyed. My babies. The ones I had injected myself with hormones for, the ones I had prayed for, they weren't on hold. They were gone. Because he bet on a horse? Because he needed a rental car? I flipped the page. A legal document. Dissolution of marriage. Draft. It was dated 3 months ago. Strategy. Establish full custody of intellectual property via community debt leverage. Wife's mental instability, documented via therapy notes, to be used to void prenup. He wasn't just broke. He was planning this. He was building a case against me. Mental instability. That's why he gaslit me. That's why he told everyone I was crazy. He was manufacturing evidence. I felt a scream building in my chest, a hot, expanding ball of pure grief and rage. I dropped the folder back into the briefcase and snapped the latch shut. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor of the cloakroom, surrounded by the coats of people who wanted to eat me alive. The nausea hit me like a physical blow. I crawled to a small wastebasket in the corner and dry heaved. Nothing came out but acid and the taste of that metallic ceviche. Destroyed. The word echoed in my skull. I pictured the clinic, the cold storage, the little vials with my name on them. Gone. Mental instability. I pictured Grant holding my hand in the doctor's office, looking sad. "We'll try again, babe. It's God's will." It wasn't God. It was Grant. I sat back against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. I was shivering. My hands were freezing, the blood draining away to my core to protect the vital organs. Survival mode. My body knew it before my brain did. I was in a combat zone. I looked at my reflection in the brass umbrella stand. My mascara was smudged. My hair was loose. I looked like the crazy woman Grant wanted me to be. Number 1. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I stood up. I smoothed the silk dress. He wanted a crazy wife? He wanted a passive asset? I reached into my clutch and pulled out my compact. I fixed the mascara. I reapplied the lipstick, a shade called Blood Red. Grant had destroyed my children. He was trying to sell my mind. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a structural anomaly, a stress fracture, and I knew exactly how to bring a fracture to the breaking point. I walked back into the dining room. Grant was laughing. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "So I told him," Grant was saying, "if you want the permit, you gotta grease the wheels." He stopped when he saw me. His smile faltered. "Tessa," he said, "you were gone a long time. Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said. My voice was different. It was lower, steadier. It was the voice I used when I was on site, telling a foreman that his scaffolding was illegal. I walked to my chair and sat down. I didn't look at Grant. I looked at Vance. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I believe we were discussing the crystallization of polymer in saline environments." Vance's eyebrows shot up. He put down his fork. "We were." "Grant," I said, turning to my husband, "pass the salt." Grant blinked. "What?" "The salt. Pass it." He slid the silver shaker toward me, confused. I poured a pile of salt onto the tablecloth, a white mountain on the dark wood. "This is the Blackwood Cliff," I said. I picked up my water glass and poured a few drops onto the salt. It dissolved, spreading into a gray slush. "This is the ocean," I said. I looked at Grant. "Now, Grant, explain to Mr. Vance how your injection machine works. Specifically, the pressure rating." "Tessa, stop playing with your food," Grant snapped, his face reddening. "Mr. Vance doesn't need a science lesson." "He does," I said, "because the pressure rating on your machines is 400 psi. The limestone here has a fracture gradient of 350 psi. I slammed my hand down on the salt slush. It splattered across the table, hitting Grant's rental jacket. "You aren't stabilizing the cliff, Grant," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "You're hydraulic fracking it. If you drill here, you won't save the house. You'll slide it into the sea within 48 hours. Grant stood up, knocking his chair over. "That is enough. You are drunk. You are embarrassing me." "I am saving you from a negligent homicide charge," I said calmly, "and I am saving Mr. Vance from a very expensive lawsuit." I turned to Vance. The only way to save this foundation is a helical pier system anchored to the basalt layer, 50 feet down. It requires a custom torque calculation, one that only Vertex Solutions can provide. Vance stared at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Grant," Vance said without looking at him, "get out." Grant froze. He looked from Vance to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Excuse me?" Grant squeaked. "You heard the lady," Vance said. "You're incompetent. Your plan is dangerous, and frankly, your voice is annoying me." "But the contract," Grant stammered. "The waiver. We had a deal." "There is no deal," Vance said. "I don't need a contractor who fracks my property. I need an engineer who understands physics. Leave." I can't leave," Grant said, his voice rising to a panic. "You don't understand. I need this check." Vance snapped his fingers. 2 security guards materialized from the shadows near the kitchen. They were big. "Escort Mr. Miller to his vehicle," Vance ordered. "Tessa!" Grant screamed, reaching for me. Tell him we're a team. Tell him you're my wife." The guards grabbed Grant by the arms. He struggled, knocking a wine glass onto the floor. It shattered, a crisp, final sound. "Tessa!" he howled as they dragged him backward. "You bitch! You ungrateful bitch! I made you!" I didn't turn around. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. "Goodbye, Grant," I whispered. The doors slammed shut, cutting off his screams. Silence returned to the room. The other guests were staring at their plates, terrified to make eye contact. Vance picked up his napkin and dabbed his lips. "Well," he said, "that's the clutter removed. Now, Mrs. Miller, or should I call you Vertex?" He reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. He slid it across the salt-stained tablecloth toward me. "Shall we discuss your employment?" I looked at the portfolio. I had won the battle. I had destroyed Grant. But as I looked at Vance's cold, dead eyes, I realized the war had just started. Grant was a hammer. Vance was a scalpel, and I was alone in the room with him. "Let's discuss," I said. The portfolio on the table was thick, bound in navy blue leather. It looked heavy enough to kill a small animal. "Open it," Vance said. He didn't blink. He picked up a slice of pear from his salad, spearing it with surgical precision. I opened the cover. The first page wasn't a contract. It was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but the subject was unmistakable. It was me, 5 years ago, sitting in a coffee shop in Boston. I was handing a USB drive to a man in a trench coat. My stomach dropped through the floor. That was the handoff for the Soul Bridge specs, the Vertex launch. The man was my proxy, a retired paralegal I paid in cash to handle the physical transfers so I could remain a ghost. "I assume you recognize the venue," Vance said, chewing slowly. "The Bean and Leaf on Boylston Street. Terrible coffee. Excellent sightlines for my private investigator." "This proves nothing," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "It's a picture of me having coffee." "Turn the page." I flipped the sheet. A photocopy of a wire transfer. Sender Vertex Solutions, LLC. Recipient T.J. Vane. Amount $800,000. "And the next," Vance commanded. I turned again. A non-disclosure agreement. Standard employment contract, Archway Engineering, dated 6 years ago. The firm I had left to start Vertex. The firm that had stolen my patent. Clause 14, subsection B, was highlighted in yellow. Any intellectual property created, drafted, or conceived within 24 months of termination remains the sole property of Archway Engineering. I wrote the soul code 3 years after I left. I lied. "False," Vance said. "You wrote the kernel for the stress test algorithm on your work laptop 2 weeks before you quit. We found the ghost files on the hard drive backup." I stared at him. "We? Archway is defunct. They went bankrupt in 2022. "They did," Vance smiled, sipping his wine. I bought their assets for pennies on the dollar, including their intellectual property rights, including their litigation rights, including you." He leaned forward, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes like twin predatory stars. "You don't own Vertex, Tessa. I do. Technically speaking." "This is entrapment," I whispered. "This is corporate archaeology," he corrected. "I dug up the bones you thought were buried. Now here is the situation. You are currently in possession of stolen property, specifically the Vertex algorithms. That is a federal crime, industrial espionage, 15 to 20 years, mandatory minimum." He tapped the portfolio. "Or you sign the consultancy agreement. You work for me exclusively, for free, until the debt is paid." Which, by my calculation, including interest and damages, is roughly $12 million. "Why?" I asked. "Why go through all this? Why the dinner? Why Grant?" "Because you are a ghost," Vance said. "You don't exist. No address, no social media, no office. Grant was the only tether I could find. I knew he was greedy. I knew he was desperate. I knew if I dangled the Blackwood contract, he would bring you to me." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. "And I don't just want the house fixed, Tessa. The house is a decoy." He pressed a button on the wall. The painting above the fireplace, a dreary seascape, slid aside to reveal a large monitor. The screen flickered to life. It showed a schematic. Not a house, a rig, an offshore drilling platform. "Project Poseidon," Vance said. "Deep sea extraction in the Arctic Circle. The water pressure is crushing. The storms are Category 5. Every engineer I've hired says it's impossible. They say the steel will shatter." He turned to me. "But you know how to make steel breathe, don't you? The vein node, the flexible joint." "You want me to build an oil rig," I said, disgust curling in my gut. "I want you to build the future of energy," he corrected. "And you will do it. Because if you don't, I will hand this portfolio to the FBI tomorrow morning. And while you are rotting in a federal cell, I will sue your husband for the breach of contract on the estate work, bankrupting him. I will take this house, your savings, and I will ensure that the name Tessa Miller is synonymous with fraud." He checked his watch. "Patek Philippe, $50,000. It is 9 p.m. I have a conference call with Tokyo at 7 a.m. I expect the contract signed by then. My security team will escort you to the guest suite. It has a lovely view." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the portfolio and the wreckage of my life. The guest suite was beautiful. It had Egyptian cotton sheets, fresh flowers, and a door that locked from the outside. I heard the heavy thud click of the deadbolt as the guard walked away. I stood in the center of the room, vibrating with adrenaline. Think. I paced the floor. 4 steps north, turn. 4 steps south, turn. Vance had everything. The paper trail, the motive, the leverage, and Grant. Grant was gone, probably halfway down the mountain by now, crying into the steering wheel, blaming me. I sank onto the edge of the bed. The duvet was soft, velvety. It felt like a shroud. I put my head in my hands. The tears finally came, hot and stinging, not for Grant, for the trap. I had been so careful. I had used VPNs, shell companies, encrypted emails. I had built a fortress of anonymity, and one forgotten file on a work laptop 6 years ago had brought it all down. Industrial espionage. I could see the headlines. Suburban housewife mastermind. I looked at the window. It was floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the cliffs. A sheer drop to the rocks below. No balcony. Sealed shut. I was in a glass cage. Then I remembered the server. Vance said he found the ghost files on the archway backup. That meant he had the data, probably here. He was a control freak. He wouldn't leave his leverage in the cloud where it could be hacked. He would keep it on a local, air-gapped server. If I could find that drive, if I could degauss it, or corrupt it, or steal it. Without the drive, he had no proof, just copies. Copies were inadmissible without the chain of custody from the original hardware. I wiped my eyes. Stop crying. Start engineering. I needed a weapon, or a tool. I scanned the room, bed, lamp, nightstand, television, the television. I went to the flat screen mounted on the wall. I ran my fingers behind it. Standard HDMI cables, power cord, and a USB port for service updates. It was a smart TV, which meant it had a Wi-Fi chip. Vance had jammed the cell signals, but the internal Wi-Fi for the house systems, lights, security, streaming, had to be active. I pulled the TV away from the wall. The bracket groaned. I needed to access the browser. I needed to send one message, not to the police, to my dead man switch. I had set it up 3 years ago, a dormant bot on a server in Estonia. If I sent a specific alphanumeric string to a specific IP address, it would trigger a scorched earth protocol. It would delete every Vertex file, every blueprint, every bank account. It would erase me completely. If Vance wanted Vertex, I would burn it to the ground before I let him have it. I grabbed the remote. I navigated to the settings menu. Network status connected. Network name Blackwood_secure_guest. I opened the browser app. It was clunky, slow. I used the arrow keys to type the URL 192.16.8.44.11/trigger, enter. Loading, a spinning circle. Error 403. Forbidden. Parental controls active. I stared at the screen. Parental controls. Vance had locked the guest network down to Netflix and Disney+. You paranoid bastard, I whispered. I couldn't trigger the wipe from here. I needed admin access. I needed the main server room. I looked at the door, locked. I looked at the window, sealed. I looked at the vent, high up on the wall near the ceiling molding, an HVAC return vent, about 12 inches by 24, small, tight. But I wasn't big, and I did yoga. I dragged the heavy armchair over to the wall. I climbed up. The vent cover was held in place by 4 Phillips head screws. I looked around for a screwdriver. Nothing. I checked my clutch. Lipstick, ID credit card. Nail file. The nail file. It was metal, pointed. I jammed the tip into the first screw. I twisted, it slipped. I tried again, angling it. It caught the groove. 1 turn. My arm burned. 2 turns. It was going to take forever. And I had until 7 a.m. Yoing? The last screw fell onto the carpet with a muffled thud. I pried the grate loose. A blast of cold, conditioned air hit my face. The duct was dark, dusty, and smelled of ozone. I kicked off my heels. I stripped off the silk dress. It would snag. I was left in my slip and pantyhose. Not exactly tactical gear, but it would have to do. I hoisted myself up, using the chair back as a lever. My shoulders scraped against the drywall. I wiggled my hips through the opening. It was tight, claustrophobic. The metal was cold against my stomach. I crawled, left or right. The air was flowing from the right. That meant the handler unit. The server room would need massive cooling. Follow the cold. I crawled toward the draft. The metal boomed softly under my weight. Dong, dong. I froze. Had anyone heard that? I waited 10 seconds. Silence. I kept moving, slower this time, sliding rather than crawling. I reached a junction, a vertical shaft going down. I peered over the edge. It was a 10-foot drop into darkness. I couldn't go down head first. I had to flip. I braced my hands against the sides of the duct. I pulled my knees up, contorting my body in the narrow space. My spine popped. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. Don't panic. Panic uses oxygen. I managed to turn around. I lowered my legs into the vertical shaft. I slid down using friction to slow my descent. My foot hit something hard, a cross brace. I rested there for a moment, shaking. There was a vent grate in front of me. Light was bleeding through the slats. I peered through. It was the study. Vance's study. The room was empty, but the desk lamp was on, and there, sitting on a dedicated rack next to the desk, was a black tower with blinking blue lights, the server, and next to it, the portfolio. I pushed on the grate. It wasn't screwed in, it was on a latch. I pushed harder. It swung open. I dropped into the room, landing in a crouch. My knees hit the hardwood floor with a crack. Pain shot up my legs. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I was in. I crept toward the desk. The silence in the house was heavy, oppressive. I reached the server. It was a custom build. No monitor attached, just a row of hard drive bays. I scanned the labels. Backup 1, backup 2, estate_main, ext_media, ext_media. That had to be it. The external media from Archway. I reached for the drive bay. Authorized fingerprint required. A robotic voice chirped from a speaker on the desk. I froze. The bay was locked. Biometric scanner. I looked at the desk. Vance's glass of scotch was sitting on a coaster. I picked it up carefully. I held it to the light. Fingerprints. Greasy, clear prints on the crystal. I needed to lift one. I looked around frantically. Scotch tape. There was a dispenser on the desk. I pulled a strip of tape. I pressed it gently over the clearest print on the glass. I smoothed it down, trying to capture the ridge detail. I peeled it off. I held the tape up. It was faint, but the pattern was there. I walked back to the server. I placed the tape over the scanner. I pressed my thumb over the tape, applying gentle pressure. Scanning. Access denied. My heart stopped. Damn it, I whispered. I tried again. Maybe I smudged it. Access denied. Security alert triggered. A red light on the server began to flash. Silent alarm. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy boots. Running. Breach in the study, a voice shouted over the radio. I looked at the portfolio. I couldn't delete the data. I couldn't steal the drive. I grabbed the portfolio. It was the only physical evidence I could carry. I ran to the window. Locked. I grabbed a heavy bronze statue of a horse from the mantelpiece. I swung it with everything I had. Crash. The glass shattered. The alarm began to blare. A high-pitched shriek. Freeze! The door burst open. I didn't freeze. I jumped. It was a first-floor window, but the drop to the garden was still 6 feet, into a hedge of thorny bougainvillea. I landed hard. Thorns tore at my arms and legs. I rolled, scrambling out of the bush. Target is outside, south perimeter. I ran. I ran into the dark toward the cliffs, clutching the portfolio like a shield. I was barefoot, bleeding, and hunted, but I was out of the cage. The air outside was salt-heavy and freezing. It bit into my exposed skin, stinging the cuts where the bougainvillea had shredded my shins. I was crouched behind a marble fountain, shivering violently. Perimeter breach! A flashlight beam swept over the top of the hedge, missing me by inches. She's heading for the cliffs. Cut her off at the access road. They thought I was running away. They thought I was a scared housewife trying to flag down a car. I wasn't running. I was circling. I looked at the guest house, a dark shape against the indigo sky, 50 yards to my left. It was closer than the main gate. And unlike the main house, the security detail had abandoned it to hunt me. I moved low, my bare feet silent on the wet grass. The portfolio was tucked under my arm, heavy and stiff. I reached the guest house patio. The sliding glass door was locked. I pressed my face to the glass. Inside, a green LED blinked on a router in the corner. Access point. I didn't have a rock. I had a diamond. I slipped the engagement ring off my left finger, the 3-carat promise Grant had bought with credit he didn't have. I pressed the stone against the corner of the tempered glass. I struck it hard with the heel of my palm. Crack! The safety glass spiderwebbed. It didn't shatter. It crumbled. I pushed the shards inward, creating a hole just big enough for my hand. I reached in and flipped the latch. I slid the door open and slipped inside. The air was still and smelled of lemon polish. I didn't turn on the lights. I crawled to the desk where the router sat. A desktop computer was sleeping next to it. I woke it up. The screen glowed blue, illuminating the room. Enter password. I didn't have the password, but I had the portfolio. I opened it on the floor. I flipped to the back, past the stolen contracts, to the technical addendums Vance had compiled on me. There, in the margins of my old schematic, was a handwritten note in Vance's sharp, angular script. Reference sequence 44-lat-north. He was obsessed with the coordinates of the Seoul Bridge. It was his trophy. I typed 44-lat-north, incorrect password. I tried Vertex_44, incorrect password. I closed my eyes. Think like a narcissist. He doesn't respect the work. He respects his ownership of the work. I typed Vance_Vertex, access granted. The desktop flooded with icons. I was in. I didn't go for the internet. I went for the local network map, mapping drives. The system populated slowly. Main_house_server, guest_backup, finance_secure, finance_secure. I clicked it. It was password protected, but the remember password box was checked. Careless, arrogant. He assumed no one would ever get this far. I opened the folder labeled liquidity_2024.xlsx. Rows and columns of numbers filled the screen. I scrolled, my eyes scanning the red text. Liabilities, $450 million. Assets, liquid, $2.1 million. Project Poseidon, status, unfunded. I stopped breathing. He wasn't a tycoon. He was a corpse. The entire estate was leveraged against the Poseidon project, and the project was stalled because he couldn't get the engineering insurance. I opened the email client. The most recent draft was to Kensho Heavy Industries in Tokyo. Subject, Vertex acquisition. Body, the IP is secured. The architect is on board. Wire the tranche by 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or we default. He needed me. He didn't just want the patent. He needed my physical signature on a compliance form to unlock $100 million from the Japanese investors. Without me, he was bankrupt by breakfast. I looked at the clock on the screen. 9:45 p.m. I wasn't the victim. I was the collateral. And collateral is just another word for leverage. I pulled up the contact info for Kensho Heavy Industries. I found the CEO's direct line in the email chain. I didn't call him. I opened a command prompt. I typed a script. Simple, elegant. If from is not received by 7 o'clock, execute upload. To and. I hit enter. The timer started. I stood up. I picked up the portfolio. I caught my reflection in the dark window. My hair was wild, my dress was torn, and there was a smear of blood on my cheek. I looked like a warrior. I unlocked the sliding door. I wasn't hiding anymore. The walk back to the main house was slow. I let the security cameras see me. I wanted them to see me. 2 guards sprinted out of the darkness, weapons drawn. On the ground, now! I didn't stop. I held up the portfolio. Touch me, I said, my voice cutting through the wind, and I delete the Tokyo deal. They hesitated. They had earpieces. They were listening to orders. Escort her in, Vance's voice crackled over the radio. Do not touch the portfolio. They flanked me, guns lowered but ready. We walked to the front door. The house manager opened it, his face pale. I walked into the dining room. It was a ruin. The salt I had spilled was still on the table. A chair was overturned, and Grant was there. He was on his knees near the fireplace, his hands zip-tied behind his back. His lip was split. He looked up when I entered, his eyes widening in disbelief. Tessa, he croaked, you came back? You shouldn't have come back. They're crazy, Tess. They're going to kill us. Vance was standing at the head of the table. He had a fresh glass of wine. He looked calm, but his knuckles were white around the stem. You are a very resourceful woman, Vance said. I underestimated the... feral quality of your survival instinct. You underestimated the engineer, I said. I threw the portfolio onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding through the salt and stopping inches from his plate. Sit down, Vance said. No. I stood at the opposite end of the table. The power dynamic had shifted. He was sitting. I was standing. He was the foundation. I was the earthquake. Grant, I said, not looking at him. How much is the debt? The real number. Tessa, please. The number, Grant. 400,000, Grant sobbed. Gambling and the house. I wanted to fix it. 400,000, I repeated. I looked at Vance. Pocket change. Vance narrowed his eyes. You think you have leverage because you stole a binder? I have digital copies. I know, I said, and I have your financials. I know about the liquidity crisis. I know about the 7 a.m. deadline with Kensho. And I know that right now a script is running on your guest house server. If I don't enter a code by sunrise, every lie you've told the Japanese investors gets emailed to the SEC. The color drained from Vance's face. It was instantaneous. The mask of the aristocrat dissolved, revealing the frightened con artist beneath. You can't do that, he whispered. You'll destroy the project. You'll destroy Vertex. Vertex is already dead, I said. I killed it the moment I walked out that window. Now we are just negotiating the salvage rights. Grant looked between us, confusion clouding his fear. Tessa, what are you talking about? Shut up, Grant, Vance and I said in unison. Vance stood up. What do you want? I want a consulting fee, I said. $5 million, wired to an offshore account of my choosing, tonight. I don't have $5 million liquid, Vance hissed. You saw the spreadsheet. Then you'll borrow it, I said. From Kensho. You'll call them now. You'll tell them the architect is secured, but she requires a signing bonus. You will leverage their money to pay me. Vance stared at me. He was calculating. He realized I wasn't just asking for money. I was making him an accomplice in a new fraud. If he paid me with their money, we were both on the hook, mutually assured destruction. And if I refuse, then I walk, I said. And at 7 a.m., you go to prison for fraud. And Grant goes to prison for his debts, and I disappear. Vance looked at the phone on the table. He looked at me. He picked up the phone. Speaker, I commanded. Vance pressed the button. The dial tone hummed. He dialed a number. Ring. Ring. Kensho Industries, Office of the CEO. This is Vance. I have the architect. She is amenable, but there is a condition. I watched Grant. He was staring at me like I was an alien. He had never seen me like this. He had only seen the wife who baked bread and worried about the paint color. He had never met T.J. Vane. She requires a restructuring fee, Vance said into the phone, his eyes locked on mine. $5 million, immediately. A pause on the line. Then a heavy Japanese accent. If she is the real Vane, pay it. We will adjust the tranche. Done, Vance said. He hung up. He pulled a laptop from his bag. He typed furiously. Account number? He asked. I gave him the number of a shell account I had set up years ago for a rainy day. A Cayman Trust. Sent, Vance said. You'll see it in 10 minutes. Now, I said. Cut him loose. I pointed at Grant. What? Grant blinked. Tess, we're leaving together, right? We're rich. $5 million. We can pay off the house. We can... Cut him loose, I repeated to the guard. The guard sliced the zip ties. Grant rubbed his wrists, scrambling to his feet. He rushed toward me, his arms open. Baby, you did it. You're a genius. I knew you were a genius. I stepped back. He hugged the air. The money isn't for us, Grant, I said. It's for me. What? His smile froze. The 400,000 you owe? I'm not paying it. But we're married. Community property. Not anymore, I said. I pulled the portfolio toward me. I opened it to the blank page at the back. I took Vance's gold pen. I wrote a quick sequence of numbers. Mr. Vance, I said, this is the decryption key for the soul files. They are yours. Do what you want with them. Build the rig. Sink the rig. I don't care. I turned to Grant. And you have the house, you have your rental car, and you have your debt. Tessa, you can't leave me here. He'll kill me. He won't kill you, I said, glancing at Vance. He needs someone to blame if the rig fails. You're the contractor, remember? Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She's right, Mr. Miller. You're the fall guy. Congratulations on the promotion. I walked out of the front door. The wind had died down. The ocean sounded rhythmic, peaceful. Grant ran after me. He grabbed my arm just as I reached the Audi. Tessa, stop, you can't do this. I spun around. I didn't pull away. I stepped into his space, forcing him to back up. I can, I said. I just negotiated a multinational hostage crisis in a cocktail dress. I can do anything. But I love you, he pleaded. It was the same tone he used when he wanted to buy a new watch. We can start over, the baby. We can try again. That was the mistake. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my husband. I saw a structural fatigue, a rusted bolt. There are no embryos, Grant, I said softly. You destroyed them. His face crumbled. I didn't mean to. Give me the keys. What? The keys to the car. You're not on the lease. I am. He fumbled in his pocket and handed them to me. His hands were shaking. I unlocked the car. I got into the driver's seat. I adjusted the mirrors. I checked the gas. Grant stood in the driveway, illuminated by the red glow of the taillights. He looked small. Where are you going? He shouted as I started the engine. I didn't answer. I put the car in drive. I accelerated down the driveway, past the gate, past the guard who saluted me this time. I watched Grant shrink in the rearview mirror until he was just a speck of darkness against the black house. I reached the Pacific Coast Highway. I opened the windows. I let the cold air rush in, smelling of salt and freedom. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the mascara wand from where I had left it hours ago. I tossed it out the window. I didn't need to paint the cracks anymore. I was the architect now. Outro. They say you never truly know the person you sleep next to. You know their breathing patterns, their coffee order, the way they twitch in their sleep. But you don't know their load-bearing capacity. You don't know how much pressure it takes to snap them until you apply the weight. Grant broke at 400 pounds per square inch. I survived the crush depth. I'm currently living in Zurich. The consulting firm is small, exclusive, and very expensive. I don't use my name. I don't use his name. I go by Vertex. And every time I sign a contract, I check the fine print for exit clauses. Because if there's one thing I learned that night at the Blackwood estate, it's this. Love is conditional. Physics is absolute. Here's a question for you. If you found out your partner had secretly destroyed your only chance at having children to pay off a gambling debt, would you just leave them? Or would you do what I did? Save them from prison only to leave them penniless with the monster they tried to sell you to? Did I go too far, or did I not go far enough? If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.